I think we'll start. We'll get going here. I think more people are going to jump on, as they can connect. But I'll just give a quick spiel. We're TallWood Design Institute. We're we're a collaboration between University of Oregon and Oregon State University, the two kind of main research universities in Oregon. And our campuses are about an hour apart on the I-5 in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. We've been working for about 6 or 7 years now, doing applied research and applied education, looking at structural use of wood in buildings. And much of our work is focused on mass timber because it is mushrooming in the United States right now and has been for a few years. And a lot of the early efforts were, coming out of Oregon. And part of the reason for that was there was kind of a trickle-down effect from British Columbia, who were really the first jurisdiction in North America to jump into mass timber after Europe invented cross-laminated timber back in the 90s. So we have this kind of West Coast genesis and this active collaboration up and down the West Coast. And today we're going to be talking about different possible ways that mass timber can be incentivized in the legislation-wise, regulatory-wise. And so we're really excited to have a couple of speakers with us. One, we're gonna let Mary go first because I know she has to duck out about 4:45. But Mary is with AJW in California, and she's going to talk about a piece of legislation that has just been passed, just signed by the governor, 2 weeks ago. Pretty exciting, focusing on embodied carbon emissions of construction materials. And as we know, California is kind of a North American leader in automotive emission control and all of that. And this could be a really exciting step for buildings. And then we're going to have Jarrett Hutchinson talk, and I've known Jarrett for a few years, and he's with the government of BC up in Victoria on Vancouver Island. And he's going to be talking about some of the things that BC's been doing for several years to kind of promote and encourage the use of wood in larger buildings. I think starting with the Wood First Act, which is about 13 years ago now. And recently BC passed a mass timber action plan, and I think Jarrett's going to talk about that as well. And then I'll finish off just really quickly by talking about not really anything on the regulatory side, but just an initiative we have underway in Oregon that just recently was awarded a substantial grant by the EDA's Build Back Better Regional Challenge Program. And so we'll have these 3 presentations, and we'll have time for discussion after that. But I'll start by turning it over to Mary. And Mary, do you have anything you want to share, slide-wise or anything like that?
Are you seeing it yet?
Yep.
Yes, we are.
Okay, let me go into presentation mode so we get rid of the noise. Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here with you this afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to talk to you about this fun project that we did over the last year. It is, formerly known as AB 2446, as an Assembly Bill 2446 in the state of California, and our forthcoming effort on the low carbon product standard. So more about that in a minute. But I'll go through what brought us to this effort and what happened over the last year, and then what we're going to be up to in the coming year. So Mighty Buildings was our what brought us to the table. A friend and former grad school alumni and I started thinking about, well, he works for Mighty Buildings, which is a 3D printing fabrication of mostly modular homes at this point. They intend to scale up to larger commercial scale. Fun fact, Mighty Buildings does have the world's largest 3D printer at this point, but definitely innovative building design. And they are thinking about how to create net zero energy homes and want to push for policies that are as progressive as they are. And they began speaking last year. They did a tour and had Assembly Member Chris Holden come tour their facility in Oakland, California. And he took great interest in it and said, gee, I care a lot about housing, and how can I do something that's centered on climate and housing? And so that spurred these discussions about how to create AB 2446. I'm throwing a bunch of bill text stuff at you, and I'm not going to expect you to read this, but what it essentially does is it asks the California Air Resources Board, who does a lot of other environmental and emissions accounting programs in the state. It asks them to first develop a framework and then implement reductions of the embodied carbon of all buildings built in the state to the tune of a 40% reduction by 2035. I'll talk a little bit about what those different phases are. The first phase is going to be that design phase. Right now, we're in the period where ARB is going to be getting the budget, and then they're going to do some hiring and that kind of stuff. And once they've got the right people on staff, they'll begin establishing what a framework could look like. And that'll be probably a pretty comprehensive lit review and consulting with industry experts on the issue, but beginning to get up to speed on what's the status of embodied carbon accounting. And then after they are able to get their arms around putting together what a framework could look like for reductions, then they will have 1 year of reporting only. I believe that's in 2026, where they will be having people, entities, developers submit, in that case, that will be having the material providers submit their environmental product declarations. And then developers will also be submitting their whole building life cycle analyses. With that information, they'll be able to establish a baseline. And starting in 2027, the reductions will begin from that baseline that is established in 2026. So they will need to achieve that 40% reduction thereafter. During the course of the legislative session, we started by saying we wanted everything in the construction of the building incorporated, as in, for those of you that are familiar, A1 through A5. And through the course of our negotiations, we decided to trim it back, and with some expert consultation, we decided it was appropriate to trim it back to A1 through A3. So it's just material specific. And the reason we felt like that was appropriate was we heard that the life cycle accounting for construction practices was a little bit less developed and might be a little bit immature for actual regulatory markets at this time. So we were okay with moving forward with that. I won't take you through all of the ups and downs, but we did get a really great list of supporters that came on board with the bill, and we actually managed to have 0 opposition. And that was by working really closely with the developer industry. They definitely had their moments of opposition, but we were able to get them to a point of neutrality and even behind the scenes support by the end. And what I would say about that, why did the industry support this, is, well, there's 2 things. We had a lot of things going in our favor. First, we had a fantastic bill author who was in a great place to negotiate things, but also there was another bill that actually wasn't successful this legislative session, but it was relatively similar. And I think the industry was seeing, wow, these efforts are popping up in various places and the writing's on the wall and we need to figure this out. let's find the right bill author that we want to work with and find the right initiative. And let's, try to put some of our fingerprints on this to make sure that we feel like this is something that we can actually comply with. And so we did take some amendments for and overall their engagement with us was a net positive, and I feel like it made our future program stronger to make sure that it's actually going to work in the real world and not just be a legislative exercise. So we were glad to have their participation. So yeah, this does cover buildings that are both in the public and the private sector. It covers all commercial buildings and residential. So that's one of the things I'm most proud of, that we were able to not negotiate away over time. So the bill was successfully signed by the governor, as mentioned a couple of weeks ago. And the next steps will be starting to talk with CARB about that regulatory framework and working on that design and implementation. So there will be a lot more to be done there. However, there is a completely separate second phase, apart from this regulatory process, that will be happening for sure now. There was one amendment that we took within the bill, which was stripping out a credit trading mechanism. And that credit trading mechanism was basically the intent of it, what is to have an easier method for compliance between entities and a more cost-effective means of compliance for the obligated parties. We took it out because the feedback we received was that, hey, this is a really large thought, and at the point that we took it out, they said this is literally a half a sentence in the bill, and we feel like this merits a lot more consideration. And we said, yeah, fair enough. We'll take it out and we'll think about that for the coming year. But what I have come to learn and appreciate is just how big something like this is in terms of the number of different products that can be encompassed in the scope of this, and the fact that several folks have tried this before. This is not for lack of trying, but it has yet to be successfully actually done in the state. So I think that we'll have our work cut out for us. So we are beginning to coordinate a initiative, for lack of a better word, of interested stakeholders to think about how we can come together on a low carbon product standard. The state also passed a low carbon concrete bill year before. It's 22 now. So in 2021, we passed a low carbon concrete bill. And so we want to make sure that a low carbon product standard is incorporating that, but is still has a reasonable scope, of course, and is something that will allow AB 2446 to have more fluid compliance. And so we want to bring in academics and experts to be thinking through some of those difficult design questions. We want to, like I was saying, make sure that there's appropriate participation from the housing developers so that things are logistically possible, and folks like you all, low carbon product manufacturers, that'll involve cross-laminated timber and plenty of other industries as well. And so we are also going to be designing legislation that will move this initiative forward, but I think it's going to involve a much larger stakeholder process. It's going to entail both this low carbon product standard as well as the design and implementation of Assembly Bill 2446. So we're kicking it off soon, I think like next week soon. So if this is something that you are interested in participating in, you should get in touch. So looking at you, Josh, for your previous indication of interest, and we'll begin bringing folks together, and we'll have maybe in the early stages, it might be a little bit messy, but we'll hopefully figure it out over time of how and where we all fit in and what assets we all bring to the table, and we'll get a good campaign and initiative going. So that's my spiel. I don't know if we should do questions now or if we should, sorry, I forgot what the specification was on that.
Yeah, given that you have to jump off a bit earlier than everybody else, why don't we go ahead and take questions now if there are any. So do you want to just switch your camera on if you want to ask a question and unmute yourself? And there's not that many people on. I think we should be able to do it that way.
Mary, thanks so much for taking us through that. It's really super exciting that this is coming to the States. My company is a startup, and we're funded by 2150, which is a climate fund based in Denmark. And we've been seeing that embodied carbon LCAs have been starting to be codified into the building code over there. So maybe that's a point of potential synergy where we could take some of the learnings from having gone through the process already to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that we're doing, we as Neighbor are taking a prefabricated kit of parts approach to the whole building, and we're mandating that even outside of the bill, we're mandating that all of our suppliers, provide EPDs, and we're going to be doing essentially like a continuous LCA on our building typology. So yeah, I'll shoot you an email, but just really congratulations and really exciting work. So thanks so much. Yeah.
Thanks,
Great.
Joe.
My pleasure. I don't know that much response is necessary there, but
there's no question. Yeah, no, it was just to say good work. Yeah.
But Josh, look forward to being in touch with you about the next steps for sure, and looping you into our process.
Wonderful.
I have a question.
Yes. Hi, Greg.
Great.
Yeah, hey. Hi. Yeah, thanks for doing this. Quite exciting. I want to chime in with Josh. We're actually organizing some events in Europe in Copenhagen in March, and it looks like we're going to be doing one in Amsterdam specifically focused on mass timber and sustainability. So I second what Josh is saying. And there's some big wood organizations in Europe that are also involved in this. So if it is helpful, or you're seeing alignment with some of what the Europeans are doing in the exact same area, do reach out, because maybe there would be participation in those events.
That's fantastic. Yes, happy to be in touch. Did you get my contact info written down previously?
Yeah, and I sent you a LinkedIn connection request.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Great.
Mary, maybe I could ask a question about the consultative process that's coming up now. Are you entertaining having people from outside of California involved in that process as well?
I'm sure the state would welcome some participation from outside the state. California doesn't always like to do things first and be designing from ground zero. So I'm sure they would welcome learning from some best practices in other areas and getting input from other entities. Just stepping back for a second, I have been working on something called the low carbon fuel standard, not product, but fuel standard in the transportation sector for almost 15 years now. And CARB did design that from the ground floor up, and that took hundreds of people. I know that CARB does not relish the idea of doing a design process like that. And so to the extent that they can streamline this, they would certainly be appreciative.
Great, thank you. I'm sure, one of the things that's in my mind as we discuss this is, that with automotive emissions, California kind of sets the standard by which other states eventually follow, or at least a good many of them. And I think, there are some states that kind of automatically follow along with the automotive standards that California puts in place. I'm just wondering, do you see that happening with this as well, with buildings? Or do you think the dynamics are different?
Well, that's certainly the hope here, and the aspiration is that if we get this right, that this could be a blueprint for other jurisdictions to follow.
That sounds really exciting. Are there any other questions before we move on to Jarrett's presentation? Scanning the Hollywood squares here, but not seeing any hands. If you do want contact information, Mary, would you be willing to put contact information in the chat, or is there another point of contact that'd be more appropriate for this particular initiative?
Yep, happy to put my contact information in the chat. Please be in touch if you would like to be looped in, and we will even add you into the invitation for our first kickoff meeting next week.
Fantastic, thank you very much.
Yep, pleasure to meet you all. Looking forward to working with you. And I believe that some of you might know Sam Rubin from Moody Buildings. And of course, you can always be in touch with Sam as well. He's a big part of our team.
Great stuff. Thanks, Mary.
My pleasure.
Cheers.
So I'm going to go ahead and ask Jarrett if you want to take the mic now.
Sure thing, Iain. Thanks very much. Sorry, let me just make sure I can see everybody while I'm trying to do this. So can everyone see the slide full screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, so thanks for inviting me to come and speak to you today about what we're up to in BC. You'll notice the theme of my talk here has three aspects to it, because I think this is a key to success for when government gets involved in something, is to know their role and stay in their lane. And it varies depending on the initiative at hand. So is it to lead, or is it to follow, or is it to get out of the way? And so this is consistent with something that one of your former US presidents had to say on this topic. And I'm not sure if he was right or wrong, but what it does reveal to me is that people are kind of conflicted about the role that government plays in advancing new initiatives. And so it's really important that we figure out, like, how best can we move something forward. And so this is something we're keenly aware of as we try to plot our way forward, advancing mass timber. And BC belongs in this kind of conversation because we have quite the heritage when it comes to building with wood, going back to, Iain made a reference to it earlier, some legislation in 09. 09 was also the year that we raised the allowable height from 4 stories of lightweight wood frame to 6. And now that's, while we were the first jurisdiction around to do that, it's pretty much the common built form continent wide. And more recently, of course, well, it still feels a little bit recent, but Brock Commons, I'm proud to say that my role in that project was to create the building code that allowed that building to be built, the tallest of its kind in the world at the time. It's been surpassed a few times since, but yeah, it was a great project to be involved in, and really was a pivotal moment for our industry and people taking notice of what mass timber can do. And so that really was one of the foreshadowing pieces that led to something that happened just this year with the release of what we call the Mass Timber Action Plan. And you know, when you look at the activity in BC, it's pretty astounding. We have a very small population, just a few million, and yet we have almost as many mass timber buildings in our province as does the entire United States combined. And so this is something that's not lost on us, having an early mover advantage, but we don't want to get swallowed up as this industry mushrooms over time. We want to stay relevant on the world stage. And so the Mass Timber Action Plan is an attempt to do so. And it's more than just a shiny brochure. We have a team. We're serious. There's some of us, we're growing. I like to insert my commercial here because we are hiring and trying to always attract top talent. So it's a modest budget, 2.5 million Canadian dollars. For you US folks, I got to give that a bit of a haircut to the tune of 30%. But yeah, it still represents quite a commitment. And to our knowledge, we're the only office that is located within a core government with this mandate of advancing mass timber. And so that's pretty special. I'd love to be proven wrong, but we haven't found anyone like us yet in what we're doing. So the Mass Timber Action Plan, these three sort of fundamentals, I guess, is what I would call them about how we're approaching this work. So first of all, let's be honest with ourselves. It's a change management strategy. And the good news there is that change management is something that's well documented and studied and understood. So there's a bit of a roadmap there for us and how to deal with change management. Another tagline that we like to use is that we're moving mass timber from niche to mainstream. So probably this transition would happen by itself if we just step back and got out of the way, so to speak. But we think we can accelerate the transition by getting involved and supporting or even leading in some cases. And our strategy is really founded on this third bullet. We are focused on building up demand as a way to send strong market signals to forest product manufacturers that if they build it, we will come. Like there will be a customer for your product if you decide to invest millions and millions of dollars into capital expansion and so on to boost up capacity. So increasing demand in that age-old supply and demand equation, we think demand comes first, and that's what we're focused on. So the action plan itself is a public communications document, and as such, of course, there's not a tremendous amount of detail contained therein, lots of nice pictures and things. But it focuses on these three planks of economy, people, and climate. And really, how we got to this place was by stepping back and saying, if you wanted to move mass timber from niche to mainstream, what do you need to do? Like what's required? And after lots of in-house expertise and consultation with our sector, which is fairly robust in BC, other experts, we arrived at these 7 objectives, which are the subpoints here on this slide. So we believe that if you want to move mass timber from niche to mainstream, these are the 7 areas you need to focus on. And we've had some wins along the way. As I mentioned, this plan was just released in April of this year, but our office was actually constituted in June of 2020. And so we've had some time to get we don't have a standing start. Just when the official news release went out, we had some things happening already, and then we can nest under these 3 planks. So, for example, applied research projects, 55 of them. We've had some funding to be able to move those forward. We started pivoting our capital building plan for projects that the government builds here in BC. There's now been 14 of them which have been announced, and there's many more coming down with official announcements soon, we hope. And we've been getting out there and waving our flag a little bit. We were down in Portland for the Mass Timber conference and some trade missions and so on. So these are all things that we've been active in so far. We've also been able to mobilize our post-secondary institutes to step up to the plate. Some new courses being offered through our preeminent technical institution known as the British Columbia Institute of Technology. And these courses are routinely oversubscribed and have waiting lists and things. So that's all positive, as well as making tools and other resources available on the carbon front. I love the presentation that preceded this one, and we have something to add to that conversation as well. We're quite active in this space. So here's an example of one of the applied research projects we funded. This burn happened in June of this year. Pretty big, so 350 meters, I think that's 3,700 square feet. So a pretty large structure using 5 different mass timber manufacturers products across Canada, put into this one building, kind of a bit of a Frankenstein building, so we could accommodate all the different products. And then it was very tightly curated in terms of inviting 150 people to come and observe this demonstration, and not just the believers or the zealots. We made sure that the fire service and others who perhaps were a little bit leery could come and observe what would happen if you lit one of these things on fire with no sprinkler system, like worst case scenario, intentional fire, the whole 9 yards, and watch it self-extinguish within an hour. So all of there was hundreds and hundreds of thermocouples and other instrumentation in this building. And so the data and all that's going to be coming out over time. Right now, there's a few news releases with some of these kind of pretty cool pictures. On the tools front, with traditional construction, designers have many resources at their disposal, but that's not the case when it comes to mass timber being relatively new. So those are some of the problems we're trying to solve with the tools we've introduced into the marketplace, so to speak, either in collaboration with other public entities like the Canadian Wood Council, or with private vendors like Open Technologies. So basically, this is just kind of a flyover. Of course, we only have the 20 minutes, and so we have like a tool for costing and energy modeling. So you have an archetype, and then let's say, oh, I want to boost up my R value in the walls. What's that going to do to my overall metrics? Or I want to change my window to wall ratio. This tool will allow you to kind of play around with different designs, just for like an indicative type situation, as well as CodeCheck is for doing something similar with what the building codes across Canada allow at the moment in terms of mass timber. And TimberX is for structural designers, structural engineers who might want to know, like, how slender is the floor going to be if my spans are 9 meters by 9 meters? Is it going to be like too bulky of a floor assembly? It also will tell you the weight of an individual bay. Many developers, of course, know that based on the size of their lot, they already have a preconceived notion of what kind of grid spacing they want to have. And TimberX will allow someone to do an early indicative check on how those things play out in comparison to steel and concrete. All right, I mentioned public buildings, and so ESG, it's the new buzzword in many locations, and so we're happy for that, of course, because mass timber fits nicely into the environmental, social, and governance framework, where we check a lot of boxes. And in this province, thankfully, the folks who control the purse strings, we call them the Treasury Board, they have put out a directive to those who would wish to build with public money that you need to align with ESG values, specifically come to us with a mass timber option. They're not saying that every building must be mass timber, like, no exceptions kind of thing, but it's just like, hey, we're taking this serious. And in many ways, it builds on what the Wood First Act said back in '09. So here's one example of a museum building, actually. It's an archive. And so I think this is great for a few reasons. One, people wouldn't normally think that you could house priceless artifacts in a mass timber, like in a wood building, but the leadership of the museum and the design team is comfortable in moving this forward. And as well, to my knowledge, this is our first public project where they've actually baked in embodied carbon targets into the procurement. So in a traditional sense, you put out an RFQ or an RFP and say to bidders, prospective bidders, let us know how you want to build the building we need. Oh, and tell us how much energy it's going to consume. That's pretty common. We've been doing that for a long time. This building does that. Plus it says, oh, and also tell us how much embodied carbon will be contained in this building. So it's not a scored element in the RFP, but it is certainly like a signal to industry that this is something that we now care about. All right, so in the spirit of lead, follow, get out of the way, some of the things I've shown so far have been kind of a mixture. And as is the case in most Western jurisdictions, there's a more senior level of government that sets the rules, and the local governments are the ones who often have to permit the buildings or enforce the codes. And so that's the case here in BC. And so we're partnering with local governments. We want to make sure that we're like the picture on the right and not the picture on the left. And this came directly from a learning with regards to when we moved the allowable height from 4 to 6 back in '09, where local governments were feeling a little bit caught unawares. And, we had fire chiefs saying, you're never going to do this in my community. And we had planners saying, this is the best thing ever. So there's all this friction happening out there. So to sidestep that, when we introduced up to 12-story mass timber construction for residential and office, we actually just put it out there and asked for volunteers amongst local governments. Who wants to be an early adopter? Who wants to have this as a code in their community? And thankfully, most of the progressive communities put their hands up to the point where we got the bulk of housing starts and population are now covered by this, and they all are voluntarily opting in. And this will pave the way when this goes province-wide in the next year or so. And we don't expect any kind of friction, because by that time it'll be old news. So moving on from the first plank around like economy and setting up the sector and different things that we're doing like that, when it comes to the people, the second plank, you can tell from the picture there, we're not talking about just trades jobs. I think everyone on this call probably knows that, but we're really focused on like, what are the spin-off opportunities, especially in the clean tech space, and can we maximize those? And to that end, more and more training needed. We've mobilized some of our post-secondary institutions. I'd love to have all the logos on here, the ones who are involved. BCIT probably is our shining star right now with their introductory studies in mass timber, and then also another course on whole building life cycle assessments or analysis. So yeah, as I say, we're trying to get the workforce going. Our approach to workforce is really new grads and then also existing workers, because our experience has been that, you know, new grads don't make any decisions in engineering or architecture firms for the first little while. And so better to target those who are mid-career and try to get them to upskill and know their stuff, because they're the ones making big decisions. So, okay, third plank around climate. Done some early sniff test here, or scratched the surface of, you know, what's the story here. And it's shocking really how much embodied carbon contributes to our total emissions globally. In fact, our early modeling suggests that just the 1% of buildings that are newly built every year contributes almost as much carbon to the atmosphere as does the 99% of buildings that were already standing, and you know, they're just burning operational carbon. So what a disproportionate impact new buildings are having on the overall amount of emissions going up in the atmosphere. Something's got to change there, doesn't it? And we know it's a circle, so there's a whole circularity thing, end of life. What can we do for making sure we divert the waste streams and so on? A few things we're active on here. In 2023, we've committed to releasing a low carbon building materials strategy. I'd love to say we're at the point of legislation like California, but hopefully we can learn from them and accelerate because of their leadership on this file. And as well, the Pacific Coast Collaborative, I'm not sure if anyone's heard of that, but it's a north-south collaborative of Washington, Oregon, California, and British Columbia, along with some select cities within those jurisdictions like Oakland and Portland and Vancouver. And if we were a standalone country, we'd be the 5th largest economy in the world. So it has power to move the market. And at COP26 in Glasgow, the PCC announced that there would be a task force for low carbon construction. And so I represent the province of BC on that task force, and we're moving that forward as well. So lots going on this front. Okay, just in the last few minutes, I was told I had 20. So I just wanted to share one of the jewels of our mass timber action plan. And you know, you can have policies, you can have tools, you can talk and consult till you're blue in the face, but nothing really is as powerful as what we call the show me strategy. So like, show me and prove it. And so get buildings built, like get these things up, and that can be, Brock Commons really taught us that, where we had delegations coming from around the world to come and see what was done there. And so we have a program that will fund up to $500,000 of incremental costs to de-risk the financial equation for private developers who are going to try something new. You know, that's a barrier, right, for them to, why would I do something new when I kind of know how to do it the regular way? And so this program has been quite successful. We've had 3 intakes so far. And so we got lots of projects in the pipeline. Of course, the time it takes to get a building constructed varies. And so can't wait to, I'm sure our politicians can't wait to start cutting ribbons and things, but I'd like to show you just 3 projects that made the cut. These were all applicants that were selected in the end. And so they're all bringing innovation in a different way. And so this one is a project in downtown Vancouver. And what's cool about this one is it was on a 2-story warehouse building with heavy timber, like big giant columns and beams, that's been standing for 100 years. And mass timber, due to its lightweight nature, really unlocks the potential for overbuilding and a nice infill situation here. And so it's going to be contained within this one building. There's going to be this nice narrative around old meets new, and you know, a return to the traditional ways, but using engineered products and all that kind of thing. So this one's exciting because of that retrofit and existing building linkage. So innovative in that way. The second one is here on Vancouver Island, where I live, and where the capital city of our province is located. It's a fire hall, which again, not a natural fit, you know, in some people's minds. But here we have a jurisdiction that has not only come to accept that mass timber is a good idea for building, but in their building, it's actually a good idea. And this is significant for us because a fire hall in Canada, and same in the States, has to be built to a post-disaster standard. So if there was ever, you know, a major seismic event, for example, this facility needs to keep functioning. And so this will bring innovation by having a mass timber building that's constructed and designed and constructed to a post-disaster standard. So we think that's pretty cool. Here's a nice little picture of it. And yeah, the fact that the fire service is involved here is a great thing. It's again, on the seismic front, this is another project in Vancouver that is above 6 stories, which is typically the threshold where you move away from an all timber system and get into a hybrid system. But this 10-story building is going to have an entirely timber structural system with a novel perimeter brace seismic system. So most of our major development areas are in high seismic zones. So the fact that this is bringing innovation in that seismic design is something we wanted to have in our program in the Show Me approach. All right, so that's my time. I hope basically from my little spiel, you can appreciate that we mean business. We have an early mover advantage, but we don't want to lose it. As things mushroom, we don't want to get swallowed up and be not relevant anymore. So we are pretty serious about making sure that we stay in the conversation and continue to demonstrate leadership for this Northwest region, but even globally. And if there's some contact details here, I'm also happy to share the slides maybe through Iain in a PDF format, because this last one here has a bunch of links, some of the stuff I talked about here today. You could drill down to get more information. So that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jarrett. You covered a lot in a short time, and you kept 20 minutes as well. I'm going to open it up for questions. I see Evan has one. Evan was the first hand I saw, so go ahead.
That was actually a clappy hand.
Oh, all right. Sorry.
I do have a few questions, but I'm gonna hold off for now. So
fair enough.
Yeah.
All right, Josh, you go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jarrett, for taking us through that. That was a lot of great work. I was curious, is BC planning to make the LCAs that are done part of the public record? Will it be something that people can look up? Yeah.
Yeah. So with the Mass Timber Demonstration Program, one of you're giving people free money, but there's strings attached, and one of the strings is we need your data, because some developers are notoriously keeping their cards close to their chest. So
yes.
We hope it's going to be a wealth of knowledge coming from those reports in every one of the those projects that are receiving public money. And then, of course, our public projects too, it's part of the public record. So we're hoping to disseminate that as best we can.
Of course, that makes sense. I was curious, and maybe this is kind of a nerdy question, but I was curious as a follow-up. I was curious if there's been like a standardized way of reporting that has been given out to the project so that you can make comparisons between buildings. It's kind of a complex question, but yeah.
Yeah. As a fellow nerd, I love the complex questions, but I can't give you an accurate answer there. I don't know if we've given them a template for that. Yeah, sorry, I don't have an answer for that.
Sure. Thanks.
I have with me today Lenny Wimmers, one of our policy analysts, and he's taking some notes. So maybe, Lenny, we can track down the answer to that question. And if we haven't given them a standardized format, maybe we should contemplate that.
It's like a scorecard for building. It's like nutrition facts, right? Well, it's like, how do you compare building to building? Yeah.
Well, when it comes to embodied carbon, like I've been involved in codes and standards now for a decade and a half, and I really feel like we're just on the same path of energy efficiency. And in the early days of energy efficiency, no one knew how to do an energy model. People were gaming the system. You couldn't compare things like with like. So I'm hoping that all of our lived experience around energy efficiency will help us to get there with embodied carbon that much faster. Maybe it won't take us 15 years to get it all figured out. We can accelerate that process.
I'm not seeing any hands up, so I'm going to ask a question. And I jotted this down when you were speaking, but you were talking about there being some embodied carbon targets built into the sort of follow-on legislation from the Wood First Act. Do you stipulate how that should be measured, whether there's a certain software that needs to be used in order to calculate the embodied carbon, or is there a calculation methodology that is sort of generally agreed upon?
Sure. So I think, Iain, what you're referring to is the archive building. that
Right.
has baked in embodied carbon targets into the RFP. So it is a bit of a bespoke process because it's just the process that project team has come up with for their procurement process. And so in a design build kind of situation or design build, the owner retains consultants to put together the package of information, and that consultant team were the ones who devised the targets and also the methodology. So it's not a province-wide thing. It's for that project as kind of a bleeding edge type thing.
Okay, thank you. I see Terry Whitehill. You had your hand up there, Terry.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering, are you guys seeing much in the way of prefab up north now? I think that's something we're going to see a lot more down here. And mass timber is somewhat similar to that because it's kind of pieces being put together. But I'm just wondering if you're seeing much go that direction.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much great promise in prefab, and obviously prefab is a much bigger conversation than just mass timber.
Right.
And so we are seeing some, but like we'd love to see it mushroom more. Adira, one of our primary mass timber developers, for their 6-story now, they've fallen into this lightweight wood frame wall with a CLT floor plate as their sweet spot. And so there's kind of like a prefab element to that, you know, if the walls can come on already assembled, but you know, prefab, panelized, modular, that's still kind of the Wild West, and we need to get it figured out because obviously it's what's needed for our industry to really improve its efficiency.
Maureen, I think you were next.
Hi, everyone. I have, I guess, a follow-up to Josh's question regarding standardization of the comparison of the buildings from the LCA perspective. And I was just on a call with, or a meeting with the North American LCA group, and Jennifer O'Connor from Athena gave a great presentation, which included, I thought, pretty close to the closing of whole building LCA standards for Canada, which would then put the comparison between buildings in a standardized form. But what is still out there as an issue is the different software packages doing these LCAs, which poses a much greater concern, and I see some heads nodding, so everyone is aware of that. So there is no standard that says you have to use X software. Of course, I don't know if this Canadian standard is leaning towards using the Athena software as the base. I doubt it. But anyway, that was just sort of a follow-up of something that I learned today regarding standard.
We've been funding Athena to move forward with their process. But it's like in Canada, and as is in the United States, we have standardization protocols that are pretty robust. And the Athena one doesn't cut it just yet, but they're working towards getting there. And the feds are behind this, that because it really is like wash, rinse, repeat from the whole path we've been on with energy efficiency, where there was no standards, anyone could game the system in the early days. And now we have it all codified, even like, so the softwares are starting to speak the same language. So yeah, it's probably going to take a bit to get there. But as I mentioned, I hope that our lessons from energy efficiency allow us to, get there sooner when it comes to this next topic of embodied carbon.
Any other questions?
I just have to apologize to Iain, who heard my Ronald Reagan joke about 3 months ago. So I got to keep track of who attended here so that I don't recycle things too much. But in an in-person presentation, when I get on the podium and say I'm from the government and I'm here to help, it usually kills. So it's one of my go-tos. I couldn't see your faces, but I'm sure you were all rolling on the ground laughing.
Yeah, I don't really count as an audience member here today, so you're cool. But I'm going to go ahead and ask one more question. Going back to the Wood First Act, which was, as you said, right back to 2009, the province put this in place to encourage publicly funded buildings to be built with wood, or at least for a wood design to be proposed. It didn't really have any teeth though, did it? Can you comment on how successful that legislation was at getting kind of initial momentum in BC?
Yeah, I mean, is this a safe place?
Um,
Because yeah, it was really virtue signaling, wasn't it? There was no teeth. If people wanted to ignore it, they basically could, because it's the Wood First Act was sponsored by the Ministry of Forests, and it just said for any publicly funded building, you have to consider wood first. So people would do that in about 30 seconds and then move on to another material because it's the traditional way. And so we were not, and there was no real follow-up. And then, yeah, but I mean, it certainly sent a signal, and you know, we get a lot of airtime for it, that it was a big move. And maybe it was just kind of a foreshadow of the current bigger moves that we have, where now we're with the Treasury Board. They're the ones under this banner of ESG who are controlling the purse strings, saying, you know, they're at a gateway point and saying, have you considered mass timber for this project? And our office, we don't want to get called in as the mass timber police, you know, but oftentimes we will be consulted kind of like expert witnesses on the stand. You know, did they use mass timber enough? Like we had a hospital project, and it was kind of like, you know what, this is probably too far too soon for an acute care facility. So, you know, let's have a dialogue about that. And so what's happening now is head and shoulders above what the Wood First Act accomplished.
Right. And wasn't it the case that several municipalities in BC, maybe as many as 50, passed their own kind of Wood First resolutions, which said we're going to do the same thing with our municipal dollars?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think they passed those resolutions like it's Wayne Gretzky Day, it's Wood First Day. You know, it's like you'd like to. It's great. It plays well, but you know, but you need a team to move it forward, and so that's what's different about what we're doing now. This team of mine, 18 of us. It's our day job. So I did Brock Commons when I used to be in charge of building codes, and mass timber was something that I did off the side of my desk. And in 2020, I was invited to start this office where now I can do it from the center of my desk. And that's the big change that BC is seeing. And it's not that much. Like, you know, if other jurisdictions wanted to follow suit, a team of 18 in the grand scheme of things, like it's a nice, robust team, don't get me wrong, but those dollar values are kind of like rounding errors in most state budgets. So, but yeah, we think by being centrally located there inside of government, we have access to levers and the conversations that we need to have to make some meaningful change when it's appropriate. You know, I'm coming back to my theme. We're keenly aware and we're under no illusions that we shouldn't be leading everything. We are a catalyst office in many cases. In many cases, really what we should do is just sort of cheer from the sidelines, or sometimes just like kind of vacate the space and let people do the good work they do.
Okay, I'm just pausing to see if anyone else wants to raise a hand or. Okay, not seeing any. I feel a bit self-indulgent here, but I do have a couple more questions. I'm just going to go ahead and ask those. I'm aware that BC also has some pretty ambitious climate, legislation to tackle climate change, and there's regulations going into effect, kind of ramp down on the operational energy of buildings. How does that dovetail with what you're doing out of your office?
Yeah, so in the most recent iteration of our climate action plan, you're right, operational energy is still the primary focus. But we were able to get in there that there needs to be a low carbon building material strategy. That's next gen climate action when it comes to the built environment. And we were able to get a commitment that we would create targets for public sector buildings by 2030, which is in one breath very far away, and another breath kind of just around the corner when it comes to codes and standards. So I would say the province is just kind of awakening, like many jurisdictions, to the need to move to whole building life cycle and move past this idea that just operational energy is important. And you know, if history repeats itself, the climate plans of governments refresh themselves once every 3 to 5 years. Usually, there's an election and then the new people come in, they want to make their mark. And so like, that's another advantage that we have being public servants, is we're sort of aware of the political animal and the cycles that happen. So personally, I'm kind of gearing up for maybe the next iteration of the climate plan to get more serious about it. At the moment, we need to have a bunch of pre-work to do. We're also in an environment where costs and affordability, again, find themselves, front and center. And so proposing things that cost more is always going to be a challenge. Yes, we would love to get our we must get our climate targets met, but there's also realities at play in this case as well.
Very good.
Are you at liberty to talk any more about the Pacific Coast Collaborative? We almost had somebody else come and speak a little bit from Oregon DEQ about that. So I was just wondering if you can touch a little bit more on the task force for low carbon construction that you mentioned.
Sure. Yeah, it's well supported. They have a kind of like the previous speaker. There's someone in the private sector, a firm in the private sector that's providing the secretariat services. So they're getting paid to run it forward, because how it is sometimes with task force that are just run by volunteerism. It's a challenge. We meet, I don't know, was every couple of weeks. The current status, they're putting together a map of all the existing initiatives that are already in play, and seeing, what synergies there are, what gaps there are, all that kind of regular policy wonk kind of work that needs to happen. And to be honest, it's comforting to see other jurisdictions moving ahead, because it gives political cover to our folks. The previous speaker mentioned kind of not wanting to be the first. People want to be sort of the second and third. It's the same in building development too, isn't it? And yeah, so it's legit. Like, there's an engaged group. I think there's probably 30 people on the calls typically. As I say, they're putting together these policy maps, and then they'd like to do a symposium of some kind. Yeah, I'm not sure what else you want me to say about the program there. You probably would, if you had another meetup, I'm sure you get someone to come in and talk about it more than just what I'm doing off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounded like it was in early stages, so I'm not surprised maybe there's not more to say right now, but that kind of makes sense that you're talking about mapping existing initiatives. I mean, from my perspective, it's hard to keep track of all the various actors and players and what's going on. And, for instance, I was wondering if you guys have been working with the Carbon Leadership Forum at all, and, what they're up to these days. So yeah, there's so much going on. It's hard to track. So just kind of curious what your timelines are, what your goals are, what are the anticipated major outcomes, that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I probably wouldn't be the best person to try to give an overview on that. But yeah, maybe it could be a topic for a future meetup. The reason I'm interested in that project, I mean, obviously, who doesn't want to save the planet? But my day job is to implement mass timber, take it from niche to mainstream. And so if people start caring about embodied carbon, then the product that I'm representing is going to be the natural solution every time. So that's our interest in participating in that, in addition, of course, to the altruism interests of it's the right thing to do.
I think it's interesting to speak about this idea of alignment up and down the West Coast on climate policy and these kinds of low carbon building policies. This is probably a long time ago. I'm probably dating myself a bit, but I remember seeing it was kind of a photo op, and there were the 3 governors of the Western states. I know, and Schwarzenegger was in California at the time. And then I think it was Gordon Campbell was Premier of British Columbia. And all 4 of them were signing a kind of a joint declaration that they were going to be working together on climate change. I don't know if anything like real tangible ever came out of that, but it struck me that was, the alignment of, at least the kind of philosophical alignment of the Western states and BC on this stuff does present an opportunity for mass timber. There's already, if you look at the processing facilities in British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon, and the market in California, and the projects that are already happening, in BC and Oregon and Washington, and the Bay Area, I guess, that's spreading into California. There's really, I often say, I think there's the opportunity for the West Coast to become this kind of world leading, cluster on mass timber manufacturing. And of course, that would obviously be a lot easier if there was kind of a harmonized landscape in terms of policy towards these kinds of buildings, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And a rising tide is going to lift all ships. Like, we're aware that we have an early mover advantage on the manufacturing side. And obviously, every time there's a public sector building, we want to use BC wood and that kind of thing. It's sort of a little bit of, can't help but be a bit protectionist. But the reality is the models for how much this is going to grow means if we just continue to keep a slice, we'll do fine. We're fine. So we can share the love, and there could be stuff going on in Washington and Oregon. But our main focus is we just want to stay relevant, and we don't want to get subsumed by like a bully come in and steal our lunch money kind of thing. Like we got here first, we want to stay. And so our mass timber action plan is designed to make sure we stay relevant on the North American stage, but world stage. And we'd like to be a hub for not just the products, but also the services. We already have like a hotbed of expertise happening in the lower mainland of British Columbia. And so exporting not just our products, but also our professional services, there's a huge opportunity there for us as well.
Well, thank you, Jarrett, for taking the time to be with us today until after 5 o'clock on a Thursday night. I was going to give a short update on our Oregon Mass Timber Coalition. I think I'm gonna table that until the next meetup when we have time to discuss it in a little bit more detail, rather than bookend this whole discussion with this slightly different topic. So I think I'll table that. If people have any last questions before we close, I'm going to kind of look at the squares for any last hands or anyone switching on their camera, asking that vital question. Going. No? Okay, good. Well, thanks again, Jarrett. And thanks everybody for coming and taking part in this. I think we're getting close to going back to the in-person thing. Evan, I think we have to do it pretty soon. This is fun, but it's even more fun when we can share a glass of beer and talk about these things. So thanks everybody for joining us, and stay tuned for the next meetup. Speak to you soon.
Thanks, Iain.
everybody.
Bye-bye.